All right. So a couple weeks ago, I was asked to fly over to Los Angeles and talk at VidCon for Blackmagic Design. And I did a couple demos there, one of which was about DaVinci Resolve's color page. That made me think, maybe it's time to do a complete color page breakdown video, because there are so many things and little tools inside the color page that you probably don't know of. So let's get that going. These are all the topics that we'll discuss in this video. Pause the video to have a better look at it, or just simply use the YouTube playbar to navigate through the video more easily. Enjoy. A very warm welcome into DaVinci Resolve's color page. Don't be overwhelmed, no need for that, because I will break it down as good as I can. So first off, let's start with the gallery view. The gallery view is basically the place where you can store your grades. So for example, I want to save this grade for later use, then I can right click on the player, grab still, and then it will be stored inside my stills one folder. This folder is a local folder for this project only. All right, so if I switch to another project by, for example, pressing Shift H and clicking on one of these, doesn't matter, then that folder will not be there and it's erased by a fresh one for that particular project. If I want to bring this grade across, I can make a new album, right? So add Power Grade album. I did that already, and then I can just drag that one in here. Now, if I go to another project, this grade will be there for me to use. So that's really nice. As you can see, I used a bunch of my projects' best grades for later use. All right, so let's say you want to use a grade from clip C onto clip A. Right? In this case, I took a still from this clip and I want to add that grade onto this clip. What you can do is right click, apply grade, and then it will do all the magic for you. But what you can also do, if you, for example, want to add this grade after the existing node tree, you can append node graph. All right, so now, of course, it looks ridiculous, but the entire grade from this clip will be posted after the entire node tree of the existing clip. All right. What you can also do is right click, display node graph, and then drag, for example, this node only onto this clip. Boom. It doesn't do a lot because maybe it's a small tweak, but now you have that node in your current node tree. Super powerful, super easy to use, and definitely highly recommend to play around with these tools. Next up, if we take a look at the drop-down menu, you can change the label name. So say, hey, YouTube, what up? You can also import different power grades from your stored computer somewhere, and you can export them. This is, of course, extremely powerful if you want to either sell them or you want to store them in your Google Drive if they're extremely precious. They will be saved as a DPX file, which you pretty much cannot load in anywhere else, only Resolve. So make sure you name them properly so you remember that this is a power grade. All right, next up, we've got a bunch of other options that you just have to go through and see what they do. All right, so we've got our zoom in functions. We've got some filter options. We've got our block view and a list view. I always have the block view because I like the thumbnail. You can search on your label name or other labels that you put onto it. And then here are some extra options that you can, change the color grade, power grade path and all that stuff. All right. Then you've got this expand button, which is super powerful. Click on it. And probably this is the view that you're gonna get. All right. So the first, page that is loaded is this. These are all built-in power grades from Resolve, so highly recommend to just check them out, smash them on your footage and see what they do, because you can actually learn a lot from them. All right. But the cool thing is, if you have other projects with stills in the local stills one folder, you can access them by going to your local database, search for whether they are on admin or not. For me, they're not. I don't know why, but let's say I want to use one of my stills from my Helios video. I can just drag this one here and then just let go in my stills folder and shebang, it's there. So pretty cool to not having to switch between projects and, create a new album and then just drag them in the album, go back to your project and yada, yada. Really nice. The LUTs, of course, everybody knows them. Lookup tables, presets for color. What you can do is right click here somewhere, doesn't matter, reveal in Finder. And then you get your Finder window with all the LUTs, like the folders that correspond to everything that is in here. let's say you want to create your own LUT folder, which I've done here or here. You can just right click somewhere, new folder, call it Hoi, and drag this. For example, this is my own LUT, yeah, so drag it in there just for, you know, example. Go back to your LUT folder, right click, refresh, and then whoo, Hoi is there. Great. So that's how you can import your own LUTs, and then if you want to apply them to your footage, just drag them onto the clip, and that's that. Easy as that. You can also just right click on the node itself, LUT, and then here is Hoi. Nice. So that is that. Not a lot extra I can tell about LUTs, but just check it out. Go to the page and just see for yourself. Next up is Media Pool. Media Pool is exactly the same as in the edit page, so I won't go over too much detail on this one. So just check it out. These are all my bins. They're definitely not being organized well. Normally I have a very structured organization, but this was a project that I did for Blackmagic, which I had to do fast. I'm sorry. So that's that. That's the Media Pool. Next, timeline. A couple cool things about the timeline is that you can, of course, scrub through the timeline and see what is up. But one thing that is very nice is, let's say you've got a couple layers of clips. Let's do it like that. And you're color grading, and you actually want to see only the clips that are on timeline 1. What I always did previously was go over to my color edit page and then deselect these, you know, and then go back. But you can actually do that right here. Click on V2 or V3 and they're deselected, and you can see all the clips that are actually on timeline 1. And if you know that this option is here and works so well, you can also apply that to your edit. For example, do like your talking head on layer 1, do your B-roll from your kitchen on layer 2, your B-roll from your garage on layer 3. So that way you can really easily switch through the different sequences and, you know, color grade these sequences. Amazing. Cool. So though I must say, if I, you know, don't use this, then I'll deselect it because it saves a little bit of space. All right, clips. Well, these are all the clips that are, you know, in line of each other. Yeah, so it starts with clip 1 and so it's the last clip, obvious. You can filter a lot, so ungraded clips, then, you know, all the clips that have no node whatsoever are being presented, but also, for example, flagged clips, marked clips, grouped clips, tracked clips, clips that have a noise reduction node on it, this one, which is the only one, and so forth and so on. All right, so it's super powerful to be doing it this way. Oops, all clips. Because that way you can really find specific clips in a huge project extremely fast. All right, next up, we've got the node tree place, which I'll go over to into much more detail later. We've got the effects panel, right? Many effects. There's actually a couple ways to add in effects. All right, so what you can do, for example, is you can either drag and drop it onto your timeline and then connect it like that and then link it through like that. Takes a lot of time. What you can also do is drop it, hold down shift and then hover it over the line and it will, you know, click it in there. What you can also do is just create a new node, Alt S, and then just drag it on there. All right, a couple ways to do it. Cool. That's the effects page. Then the light bridge page, light box page. All right, so you can really see all the clips in one overview to see if your grade matches the next or the previous clip. All right, so that was the top layer. Let's go to the player box or the player section. So for example, you're accidentally zoomed in all the way. You can zoom out manually, but you can also just click the button here, fit, and you're done. All right. Right here, you've got your timecode settings. This is the source timecode, which I always leave it on. And this is the timeline timecode, which is also featured here. So I pretty much don't touch that. This little button shows you a graded or ungraded version of the clip. This will expand, so it will automatically get rid of the node viewer and the gallery viewer. If you want an even bigger view, you can press P on the keyboard and it will, you know, fill the screen completely. And here are some extra options that you just need to go over and see for yourself. if you right click the player itself, you can grab still, grab all stills from first frame, from middle frame, and then grab missing stills from first frame or middle frame, and then show reference wipe, reference mode, gallery timeline offline, and so forth and so on. This is of course very nice to, you know, play around with and see if this will help your way of working. I will go over into more detail a little later, so hold on tight. All right, so for example, you want to match this clip to this one. What you can do is you grab a still, which we've done already, and then you go to the clip that you want to match, and then click this little button right here. All right, so now if this doesn't pop up, just double click this one, then you know it will fire up and you can see it. What you can now do is you can wipe it, so you can actually see if it matches the other clip, which is super nice. And you know, there's more options to do it. You can do it up and down, diagonal. You can even, you know, do a little fade thingy. But yeah, there's multiple ways to do it. It's really nice because then you can actually see if the exposure matches, if the colors match, and so forth. The cool thing is that the waveform or the scopes actually work with this in real time. If you want to get rid of it, click the button again, and you're out. The next thing is a selection view or split screen. Right now, nothing happens because we haven't selected multiple clips. This setting is set to current group, so we first have to make a group, right? So let's say we want to add in all the watchmaker shots. Then just press Command, click, 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 right click, add into current group, and then boom, there are our clips. Now, for whatever reason, I want to add in this clip as well. I can select it and add into current group, and then it is in there as well. So that's a really nice way to make selections and see if these images match. For example, you can do that from the first frame, the middle frame, and then the last frame, and see if these frames actually match together without having to do that with the wipe thingy, because you know, that only shows you one image and this shows you a couple images. So that's nice. There's more options. Go over them, see if they work for you, but the current group is actually the one that works the best for me. Now, I want to go a little deeper into the group function, all right? So let's get rid of this one. So a really cool way in order to work with groups, and that is also a little jump forward to the node tree here, is whenever I get rid of all these groups, so remove from group, you see that there's two little dots left over. All right, so this is our main node tree, yeah? And this is our timeline node tree. And you can really, you know, kind of think of as this is your adjustment layer if you work in Premiere, for example. So if I, you know, go to my timeline, drag in an adjustment layer, and then that shows up here. If I add in blue, that will be, you know, put on all the clips that are underneath the adjustment layer. All right. So the cool thing about Resolve is that you can use that timeline function, and that will affect all the clips in that timeline. So for example, if you want to put film grain on your entire film, you can do that here. You don't have to do that one individual node on every clip. You can just put a node here by pressing Alt S and then go down, film grain, put it in there, and you're good to go. All right, so that's a very powerful way. Now, if you want more control, that's also possible because it's DaVinci Resolve. Let's say I want to add film grain only on the watchmaker clips. Now, I can do the same thing. I can, you know, highlight all these clips, add into current group, but for this example, let's add a new group. Let's call it watch. Boom. Now, if I click on these clips, it will automatically get into that group. So if I click on it, I go to these dots, suddenly there are 4. The first one is your pre-clip, your clip, your post-clip, and then your timeline. All right, so what it does is the group pre-clip will actually, for example, if I put blue here, it will actually put blue on all the clips that are in the group before our node tree. All right, so you should have seen it like that. This node has been put right here, right? So in front of our node tree. All right, so the post clip does exactly the opposite, puts it at the end of the node tree for all the clips in our group. All right, now, and then you still got your timeline that affects all the clips in the timeline. All right, super powerful, super nice to be able to work like this, and I use it a lot. If I have multiple sequences that I want to, you know, treat individually, But as a sequence, I do it like this. All right. Amazing. Alrighty. Then select all these clips again. Bing, bing, bing. And then delete from current group. And there we go. All right. So the next one is the highlight selection tool, which is corresponding to Shift H on the keyboard. All right. So right now, nothing really happens. But if I go to my qualifier tool here, which will go over in a second, I can click somewhere, press Shift H, and I can see what I have selected. Pretty cool. More on that later. Okay, so next up, the node tree. All right, so we talked about it briefly, but very shortly, if you really want to learn a lot about color grading in particular, I suggest you watch other videos of mine. But right now, a basic understanding of the node tree, how it works is I always put one adjustment per node. All right, so you kind of have to read it from left to right. So this is where it starts. This is where it ends. Then there is an order in how you do things, right? So you cannot randomly place nodes somewhere and put particular adjustments on that node. You have to balance your image first. So that means exposure, white balance, contrast, saturation. And then you do your adjustment to another color space, for example. Of course, you can do it without a color space transform tool, but it saves me a lot of time. And it's a very nice plugin to use. It comes with Resolve, so why not use it? So that transforms it into Rec 709, which is my output color space. Then I go over into my color grading section. So I actually tweak the colors toward somewhere I like it. Yeah, that depends on the project, of course. Like this is very goldish, has a very distinct look. So that's called color grading, right? So you've got your color balancing, color correcting, and then color grading. So you have to kind of get used to the order in which you do things, but you can watch plenty of videos on that order and how to build up your grade. All right, so that is that. Now there's of course a couple different kinds of nodes. Right, let's show this on a clean clip. Here you've got a node. If you want to add in more nodes, Alt S is your friend. Yep, you can make as many nodes as you want, but I usually make about 6 or 7, and I start grading with these. Now, if I want to make an adjustment based on one global adjustment, for example, the color red, I make parallel nodes. So I press Alt P. This creates a sort of a combined node that works as one global adjustment. Hope you understand. But to give this a little bit more perspective, is this first one could be, for example, your U versus U. You play around with the reds a little bit, beautiful. Then this could be the wheels, push in a little bit of highlights, and this could be your saturation curves. All right, so like that. Whoop. Amazing. Let's say this is good. I do this because now I know that all these adjustments have something to do with the color red. All right, so if I really want to go into into the nitty-gritty, I can do parallel node configurations for every major adjustment based on one global adjustment. Hopefully that's makes sense. So that's that. You've also got layer nodes. Let's go to a graded clip. Alt L. So let's say I add in blue. That's a bit much. Let's say I add in blue, and now I add in a bit of red. You can see nothing happens because the bottom layer node is actually overruling everything that happens in the top one. Does that make sense? So if I take this one off, boom, everything's red. But if I put it on, nothing happens because this node makes sure that nothing comes through. All right, so what you can do then, for example, is you lower down the output of that node by lowering the gain, and then suddenly the top layer comes through. That's one way to use it. There's multiple ways to use it, but this is a bit of basic explanation of what a layer node can do. All right, next up is the clip section, which is this whole thing. If I right click on the first clip, you can see a bunch of options. All right, so the most important ones are, of course, the group options that I talked about already. You've got your different groups that we made. You've got your flag options, marker options, which I typically don't use in a color page because I probably already used it in the edit page. All right, clip color, and then there's a bunch of other options. The one that is really nice is the generate LUT option. The 33-point cube is the one you want to get if you want to export your own LUTs based on this grade. All right. So that is it for the clip section. Of course, you've also got your timeline here, but we already discussed it. Pretty basic and self-explanatory. All right, let's get into the fun part, the grading part. I'll fly through these pages so you have a basic understanding of what they do and how they can help you. All right, so the first one is your RAW tab. This tab is only available if you shot in a RAW codec. For example, Blackmagic RAW, ARRI RAW, Red RAW, you name it. All right, so this gives you all the settings that you normally have inside your camera, but you can alter and play around with them in post. All right, next up is the color match area here. It is super useful if you shoot on multiple different cameras of different brands, shooting in different color spaces, and you want to match them all together. The one thing that you need is a color card. This is a card that has colors on them that are exactly the way they are. Okay, so I've got a clip here that I want to shot match, for example. I go over to my color match tool. I click on the color chart. So you match up the dots to the outsides of the card so that all the boxes align and are inside the box of the color card. Then you click the right card that you're having. So this is the X-Rite Color Checker Classic. Then it was shot in Blackmagic Film Generation 5. This is Rec 709 because it's the target gamma, and Rec 709 target color space. And there you go. So this is now matched to what Resolve knows are the correct colors. So if you do that to all the cameras, they will get an extremely good match. And that really speeds up the workflow because you don't have to do it manually. That's really nice. If you compare the two with the color space transform tool, if I add in these two and I want to, I'll try to match him in terms of play still. I'll try to match him in terms of luminance. Boop. Let's see. Hop. Right, so it's a bit difficult maybe, because now you have to do it all manually, but kind of the same. Not entirely, but kind of. You can see that the colors on the color checker are a lot more vivid and not too over, Of course, this is just a starting ground. You can do a lot with it. You can bring it down in exposure. You can do a bunch, but it will give you a better understanding of where the colors are at. So that's great. Moving on are the color wheels. These are actually the controls that you need to learn first. Right, so let's fly over them. These are your temperature sliders, your tint sliders, which are your white balance, right? Your contrast, your pivot. Then we've got our lift, gamma, gain, offset, shadows, midtones, highlights, and global adjustment. Of course, wheels are self-explanatory. Here we've got some sliders that you can really change the wheels in one way, so you have a bit more control over where the ball goes. Here you've got your sliders, which actually tamper with the luminance values. Then you've got your color boost, self-explanatory, shadows, highlights, saturation, hue, if you want to go funky, and then you've got your luminance mix. All right, awesome. Next up, we've got our bars. Same thing as your color wheels, a different layout, does the same thing. And you've got your log wheels. Your log wheels do act differently. You get more control over your shadow area. So if you check the scopes down here, if I drag them down, you can see that only the shadow area is dragged down. Whether when I drag this part down, it sort of scales down uniformly, right? So it's more attached to the rest, and the log wheels really grant you access over particular parts of the image. So that's really good. But they're called log wheels, so you should use that on log image. However, if you decide to use it on a clip that you use the CST node on, for example, this one, you can also, if you really want to, use it after, because the CST node is non-destructive, so it won't bake in the data as it would when you use a LUT. Next up, we've got our HDR controls. Same thing as the primaries, but when you work with HDR footage, gives you even more control over which part of the dark, shadow, light, highlight area is affected. You can do it by using these sliders and checking what is actually being affected when I now drag the exposure up or down. Next up, a very powerful tool. This is used for noise reduction. So whenever you have a very noisy image like this one, I use a noise reductor to get rid of that image noise, and it works really well. My preferred settings are 3, better, and then like a value between 8 and 12. All right. Next up, we've got curves. This is super powerful and fun to play around with. So let me show you what curves do. Of course, so curves are ways to add in contrast, right? So let's get rid of this one. The first one is your regular curves. So let's say I want to add in contrast. I go to my dots here, editable splines, and then I can make a very nice smooth S-curve. Beautiful way to add contrast. You can of course also do it by just, you know, dragging up a little. Oh, now the editable splines are still on. You can also just do it like this, but it's a bit less OCD-ish. Of course, you can also deselect particular colors and really work with only one color. Yeah, you can really play around with this and see whether you get the result that you are after. Next up, we've got the hue versus hue slider. Now, I chose this clip for a reason. Let's add in a bit more contrast. Because it's super nice to be able to have so much control over a particular color. For example, I only want to affect the red jacket, I can punch in this red dot and it will create a dot on the magenta and on the yellow side. So I can only affect the red and see what happens. Suddenly he has a purple jacket or a green jacket. So cool, right? So this way, if there is only one color like present in the frame, doing it with the color curves hue versus hue sliders are great. All right. Going over to the saturation, same thing. This will affect the saturation of one particular color. The luminance, this will affect the luminance of that one particular color. All right. So this way you can really alter the image in very specific ways. But if, for example, there is more, let's say, red in the frame somewhere, then what you can do then is go to your window section, which is over here, click here, and then add a window onto your subject. And this way, only this area, if I press Shift H, which we've learned earlier, you can see that only this area is being affected. Now, all good and all, but he's moving, right? So how do we do that? Well, you have a tracker in DaVinci Resolve. So let's go over to the tracker window. And then if you have a good selection of the subject, it will actually do a good job. But, you know, this is a bit of trial and error. So you've got a couple options here. You've got your window tracker, your stabilization, and your effects tracker. For this, of course, we have a window, so we do a window tracker. Press this button, tracks forward and backwards, and there we go. I mean, what? It does an amazing job. Insane to me, like that this is possible and this fast. It's so what we can do now is if we go over to, you know, the curves, we can really go crazy on him, you know. Okay, let's only do the jacket because that is the red hue. And if there would be another red color in there, nothing would be affected because, again, we have that selection on him. And it even, you know, it doesn't really do a good job right here, but that, you know, you can refine that a little bit better. But, you know, at least the tracker is on point. Wow. So that's that. All right, so that is the curves, that is the tracker, and that is the power window. You can do a lot more in the power window, like gradient grade. So for example, you want this to be brighter, this to be darker. You can do that here. Oh, not in the log wheels though. All right, so that's that. If we deselect it, you can see that now this part is dark, and this is light. All right, so that's one way to play around with it, but just try and check it and see what up, and that's that. So that is the window and the tracker. All right. Now let's say you need to have even more control. Then you have the qualifier. The qualifier can qualify particular colors or particular saturation values or luminance values, which is light. And that is super powerful to do because if the light, for example, doesn't change in the frame, the selection will be spot on. All right. So if we press Shift H and we have, you know, for example, now we only want luminance, right? I'm going to click on our bright snow. you can see that it makes a perfect selection of the bright snow, right? Because we selected luminance. Now, if we want to expand it a little bit, we can expand it, and see that gradually stuff gets added in because that is part of a lower luminance value, right? But we can also move it up. You can see that now slowly that value starts to fade away and only the brightest parts are remained in that shot. So this is a way to do it. You can also do it with you. If we click the red jacket, you know, great to see this. You've got some more options here. You can either click this one to add in a little bit of this of the colors, maybe in another area of the footage, or this one to feather the edges, make it softer. And then you have all these controls right here to, you know, matte finesse to get a better selection. Clean blacks, clean whites. You can blur it out a little bit, you know, blur radius. And then, you know, let's say this is an amazing selection. If we move over in the clip, you can see that it is actually selected perfectly because it is only focusing on the red color. All right, awesome. So that is the qualifier. There's countless of ways that you can use a qualifier, but I'm sure if you get into color grading, then you'll find out these ways. You've got Color Warper. This is actually a tool that I haven't been using too much, so I'm not gonna talk about this one because I'm not as familiar with it. But essentially, it's a very powerful way to play around with colors, right? Because you have a lot of control because every dot is, you know, like you can change every dot basically. The cool thing is that you have a vector scope built in so you can see where the colors are at. So I can, you know, drag that red up and boom, suddenly the red is popping. Yep. And then I can maybe, you know, drag the blue up and then boom, got a lot of contrast here. So that's a cool way to play around with a warper, but it, you know, it's kind of difficult and you have to get used to it. But if you know how a vector scope works, right here, then you just, you know, can start working with it. Awesome. All right. Oop, waveforms. So the next thing is our magic mask. Now this is where it gets interesting. So what you can do, what I did here in this example, if I fit it here, I use the person magic mask to create a, you know, a sort of mask around myself and put text behind me. Boom. As you can see, you know, the results are actually quite good and it took me no time at all. Before this was possible, I, you know, should have had to rotoscope myself with the pen tool for hours. Took forever. The same thing goes in this clip, and this is done with the object mask, and look at it. Boom. Amazing. Okay, so how this works is you actually click on the object mask right here. You click on the dropper icon, and then you just make a little line, a little bigger maybe. And then boom, suddenly it is all selected because it can, you know, find that object for you. Same here, go to the person object magic mask and then click on myself, and it takes a little longer. Boom, you've got a selection. Now, of course, you can refine this selection, and you should, but you can see how fast it is. It took me at least an hour to make a nice rotoscope around myself, and then I have to keyframe every frame, so that's horrible. So yeah, super powerful, super cool to have this option. So next up, we've got our blur options, right? This is where you can add in a bit of sharpness. So for example, right here, let's say this needs to be sharper. I pull this down to 0.48, and if I deselect it, you can see a minor difference. You can see the difference in the scopes though. All right, so that's one way to do it. If you want to blur it out, you can put it up, right? And then suddenly it becomes blurry. Cool. Next up, we've got our key. Now, this is interesting if you, for example, have, let's say we put a lot of orange or like magenta in the frame. I can put my key output down, and that is basically kind of an opacity for that node. All right, so if you have a LUT and you want to lower the output of the LUT, you can do it this way. All right. This is resizing and reframing options. Very useful because it sticks to the clip. So if you grab a still and you paste it onto another clip, the resize options will actually also transfer there. That's nice. And then you've got some 3D tools here, which I have never used before, so I cannot go into detail about it, unfortunately. Next up, we've got our keyframes. This is where you can do a lot of keyframing and animations and zooms in, zooms out, you know, all that stuff. If you are familiar with any software, then you know this already. You've got your scopes, different scopes, vector, waveform parade, histogram, and so forth. And then here you've got information about the clip that is selected. Whew. All right, I was hoping to do this in 15 minutes. The tip that I want to give you guys is focus on the primary wheels first. Learn to color grade with these tools first. Get used to the node workflow, and the rest will come, you know, as you get better at it. All right, let's hop over to the studio. All right, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me and chilling, you know, in your chair, on your couch, or on the toilet. That's what I always did, you know, watch DaVinci Resolve tutorials on the toilet. But wherever you may be at this certain point of time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.